I was casually strolling through the aisles looking at all these different stalls when there was one particular one that caught my eye. It had all this beautiful, colorful jewelry. Now the lady behind the counter, she noticed me and she was really quick to ask, "Do you know what sea glass is?" Well, up until that point, I'd never heard of the thing. I mean, I've loved the beach all my life. I was an avid shell collector as a child, but never heard of this thing and thought to pick up sea glass. And so that was here in Japan, and it quickly began my addiction for sea glass. Hi, my name is Christina Sawka, and I live here in Japan. I live in the northeastern coast of Honshu, which is the main island of Japan. In fact, this very town was just 130 kilometers or 80 miles away from the epicenter of the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, which I'm thankfully a survivor of, but unfortunately this town did get badly destroyed. Now, it could be said that some of the beach finds I find here could be debris from the tsunami, but the ones that I do find a lot are very frosted, very smooth, well over that 10-year mark, if not decades and decades old. Let me preface this with that by no means do I consider myself an expert. I've only lived in this town for 10 years, but I do have wonderful fishermen neighbors and friends who have shared their wealth of knowledge with me, their experiences and skills, history and culture that I'm so thankful for. And I also have a very patient husband who has translated everything for me to ensure 100% accuracy. So with that in mind, let's talk about Japanese sea glass. So Japan obviously has all the standard colors of sea glass, but it's the aqua sea glass that always gets the attention. It has all these different shades of teals and turquoise, aquamarines. These are the ones that always stand out. And they're often considered very rare on all the sea glass charts. But here in Japan, this color is very common. So why is this aqua color so common here in Japan? Predominantly, this aqua color comes from glass bottles that would have held things like sake, the alcohol, shoyu, soy sauce, ramen, the soft drink, and also glass fishing floats, which we'll talk about in more detail later. So naturally, the next question is, why was aqua used in so many glass bottles here in Japan? Well, in a discussion with the Japan Glass Bottle Association, they shared that bluish green color is the closest thing to natural glass due to the iron and the copper impurities found in the sand here. To save time and money from having to remove those impurities, they simply just use that bluish green glass. So even though removing impurities did become easier over time, it was found that in the Showa period, which is 1926 to 1989, the aqua color for glass bottles was actually quite popular, and it was said to be very cool and refreshing. And so those glass bottles, like with shoyu and with sake, they're often in that blue color, particularly during that era. So unfortunately, many glass bottles were disposed in the sea over time. It was natural for coastal towns like this for people to just throw their garbage in the ocean. In fact, my husband said that in the 80s, as a child swimming at the beach, it almost looked like it was the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. That's how much trash there was. Although Japan is considered one of the cleanest countries in the world by many travelers because of its streets being litter-free, most people take their garbage home, but it actually comes as a surprise when they go to the beach to see just how much trash there is. In recent years, though, there has been a push for more beach cleaning in the public swimming beaches, and there has been a noticeable step to keeping these beaches more clean, which is a great thing to see. So let's have a closer look at some of these Japanese aqua bottles. This is a Japanese version of a demijohn. It is called a
ittobin,
which basically translates to 18 liters, which is about 5 gallons. It was manufactured 150 years ago. It is basically a big size unit of measurement that would carry things such as sake, shoyu, water, vinegar, and other solvents. Like most things, wooden barrels were first used, but then they moved to this kind of glass up until the 70s, and now plastic is used. You can see that with this, the rims here are really thick, and also the bottoms, which would lead to a lot of the glass that I find that's quite thick. And this is a sake bottle. This is just a medium sized one. There are larger ones, and these are the kind of glasses that I would find. So the interesting thing is, you would think that aqua is a terrible color to hold alcohol in because the light can easily penetrate through and spoil it. So in a discussion with the Japan Bottle Glass Association, they said that they simply just did not know at the time that it was ruining the contents inside. Nowadays though, there is still sake bottles that are aqua, but they are considered as summer drinks and they're to be drunk cold, they're not heated up, they're drunk quickly, and they're often much cheaper than their brown bottled counterparts. Another common use for glass in Japan is glass fishing floats. It's very common to still find these on the beach. I have been lucky enough to find one on my beach here, and my husband found one up north where they're a little more common. I do from time to time find the seals on the beach. My absolute favorite one is this guy right here. It's nice and chunky. I think that this one comes from a 10-inch float. And here's a smaller one that I think came from a 2-inch, maybe up to 3-4-inch float. Now my collection of glass fishing floats predominantly come from that fishing shack that we rescued just a year ago. As they were literally tearing down the walls, they said that we could pull out anything that we wanted to, and ended up being hundreds of treasures. And so that really is where my obsession for Japanese antique maritime began. A little history about these fishing glass floats. These were made from recycled glass. In a discussion with the last remaining fishing glass float blower here in Japan, which he's located up in Hokkaido, up north, he said that these were not made directly from sand, but always from recycled bottles. So they would bring in these bottles like Coca-Cola, sake, ramen, shoyu, all those kind of bottles that we discussed earlier, and they would break them up, melt them, and create these spheres with them. Due to the mixtures of color from all these glass bottles, the result was that blue-green color that dominates the glass fishing floats. Of course, there are other colors like brown that came from beer bottles, and even more rare colors like cobalt, purple, orange, red, and that came from excess glass from glass factories that made high-end products. Japan calls these glass fishing floats
Ukidama
or
Bindama,
which basically translates to buoy ball or glass ball. Japan started using these floats as early as 1910, although they cannot claim to be the first ones to have used them, because in fact in 1840 Norway started to produce them. However, once Japan jumped on board, they became the leader of production in these floats. Prior to glass being used, they used these wooden floats. These were made from paulownia, which are lightweight and buoyant. However, they were causing a problem with durability and their buoyancy wasn't quite up to par. So that's why glass floats in the sphere shape were created. Now, one fisherman, he explained to me that for every 3 of these wooden floats that were held together on the net, he actually only needed 1 glass fishing float as a sphere, and so it became quite easier, more cost efficient to use glass fishing floats rather than these wood ones. By 1915, small glass floats were mass produced and soon operations opened up throughout Japan. So what started as a 3-inch glass floats, they then expanded to a variety of sizes. So those sizes include 1.5 inches all the way up to 18 inches. Now you'll see in this photo, this is my collection. The largest one there is not an 18-inch, it is only a 17-inch. What were these sizes used for? Well, basically, the smaller sizes were used for gill nets, octopus lines, and crab nets. Trout, sardines, shad, and even larger fish like salmon, these were caught with this size. Medium size were used for gill nets, troll nets, and to make stationary traps, and also for long lining for tuna. The larger size were used for techiami, which are stationary nets. They're also for marker buoys, jig fisheries, and long lining. This was especially used in deep seas. Now, Endo-san, our fisherman neighbor and good friend that many of you already know and love, he explained to me that boats that were going out into deep sea would take like 1,000 of these large floats So you can imagine just for one trip, 1,000 of those floats, why they needed to produce so many floats, and also why so many would get lost out in sea and end up on shore either as a whole or broken up into pieces of sea glass that I would find. Weights such as these would be used at the bottom of the line so that the nets could be kept straight. Therefore, there's this perfect balance between the weights and the floats. And I often find a lot of these old ceramic weights on the beach, but today they have been replaced by lead weights or lead lines. Another thing you'll find often on the beaches in Japan are these long sticks of bamboo, often with rope in them or with a flag. Last week, I counted about 20 of these sticks on a stretch of about 50 meters, which is the size of an Olympic pool. And the son explained to me that the bamboo sticks are used as flags in the sea to show where the beginning and the end of the nets are located. The white flag shows where it's deepest, and the red flag shows where it's most shallow. Now, back to glass floats. One of the first things that every avid collector does is look to see if there is a mark. These seal marks can tell us a lot about where they're from, how old they are, who used them, if they're common or not common. These marks were used to identify the floats and be used as a trademark. It must be noted that not every float has a seal mark on it. In fact, it was usually done by the large companies, and they're a symbol of the glass factory that made them. So for example, the local glass blower that was here in this town, who sadly is no longer with us, he would not have marked the ones for the local fishermen here. For those that were marked, they often came in the first syllable of the company name or glass factory name. So real quick lesson in Japanese language. There are three written forms of it. There's kanji, there's katakana, and hiragana. And basically as a newbie here in Japan learning this, totally messed with my brain. But here's a real quick lesson. Basically, kanji is the pictograph form that's taken from Chinese. Katakana is phonetic, and its origins of words come from foreign names or objects. So for instance, my name. And then hiragana basically is everything else that kanji and katakana does not cover. So that is an incredibly simplified linguistics lesson now completed. So keeping that in mind, back to floats, there are hundreds of marks that are out there. But basically there are just a few companies that really dominated the market. So I'm going to show you a few that I have. Only about half my collection have marks, but I do have some of the really common ones. So this one is Sen, and it's kanji, and it comes from the Sendai glass factory. Sendai is the main city where I live close to, so these are fairly special to me. Then we have Kita, which is very common, also written in kanji, and it means north. Next we have Se, which is in katakana, and it's believed to be the mark of the Otaru glass company. There's also Maruha and Betsu, which are other well-known marks that you just might be lucky enough to find in your collection. There's plenty of information on these marks thanks to Amos Wood and Walt Pitch, so if you haven't already done so, be sure to grab the resources as they look far more in depth into these different marks. Now to make these marks on the floats, they would have used something like this. I picked this up at an antique store earlier this year, and it would have been used for wood, but basically it's the same thing that they would have used for glass as well. And one of the fishermen here, he explained to me that although they did not stamp their own glass fishing floats, they would often stamp their wooden floats, and just basically shows who it belongs to. So actually on the wooden floats, it would show sometimes if it's the company name, the fisherman name, and or the boat name. So for instance, we have this wooden fishing float right here, and it's got Senko, which is the ship name, and then Cho, which is the company logo name, and then Hasegawa, just here on the edge here, and that is the fisherman name. So one thing that I absolutely adore with glass fishing floats are all the bubbles and the swirls and streaks that you find in this. So were they deliberately made this way? The answer is no. They're actually a flaw because basically they wanted to work as fast and as cheaply to produce these, and so they would not clean in between each production. So basically there's that mixture of the colors which adds to the glass being mixed with colors, and also the bubbles with the cooling down process. Another thing that I absolutely love about fishing floats are the nets that were attached to them so that they could be attached to each other and also to guard them from being smashed up. Some floats, in fact, are deemed as more valuable with the original netting on them. I asked around to find out from the fishermen here if there was like a standard fishing net that was used or if there's like specific purposes for different designs that were used. And basically they all said that was just up to whatever the preference was of their fishermen. And also though, it could help identify whose floats belong to whom. So very old ones would use natural fibers like hemp, and they were hand knotted. Newer ones from the late 50s use polypropylene, which then proved to be more durable. Now the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is always a popular thing and I'm always asked these questions, is about the rollers. So we've got the Tohoku roller and the Hokkaido roller. And basically the Tohoku roller is from the region where I live, and the Hokkaido roller comes from up north in Hokkaido. And you can tell the difference of them because this one is more rounded and even called fatty in some places, and then this one is more parallel and it's just straight like that. And when I asked the fishermen like if there was different purposes for them, they just said basically that's what was available in the region. Now one theory of why they created it like this kind of design, is that it was to help replicate what the wooden floats look like, and so therefore it would have been easier to substitute them from the wooden to the glass. So if you are lucky enough to own a glass fishing float from Japan or some sea glass from here, now you know a little bit about its origins and its functions. So now I want to leave you with a Japanese proverb. Kachou fugetsu,
花鳥風月
which literally means flower, bird, wind, moon. And that can be translated to enjoy the things that you learn about nature, and then therefore you learn about yourself. ありがとうございます。さよなら。